I'm Ashby Walters. I'm the Executive Director of Tax Board and Future Tax Leaders. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us on our panel today, and welcome everyone for attending our conversation today. This webinar today is part of a series of free webinars that Tax Board will be offering on how to navigate through this new environment. We will have another webinar that will be free and will provide CPE next Thursday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and that will be with some business leaders talking about small businesses, talking about what they're doing in order to survive through this environment. We want to hear your questions. You can send us questions confidentially or through the to the group through chat or Q&A features. Polls will occasionally pop up during the webinar. We'll be informing people of when those polls are popping up through the chat feature rather than interrupting the discussion. So please keep an eye out on the chat feature for those polls, and keep an eye out on the webinar itself for those polls. It is necessary for you to complete 75% of the poll questions to qualify for PPE. At the end of the presentation today, you'll receive a survey. Please complete that survey and share with us your feedback to this webinar. It helps us to improve our webinars, and it's useful information. The CPE certificates will be mailed after the surveys are complete, and summaries of our webinars will be posted on our site next week, as well as video. If there's anything you hear of or you learn that you'd like us to share with others, please send us an email. We can be at info@taxboard.org. And again, we'd like to welcome everyone for participating in this webinar, and like to thank our speakers for joining us today. So I'm going to start off by introducing Brandon Edwards. So Brandon Edwards is the CEO of Tax Credit Company. He's a company that employs more than 100 people and provides tax incentive services and solutions. And he has over 20 years of experience in the tax incentives field. Brandon, if you'd like to say hello.
Hi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Julie Scates is owner of J2T Recruiting Consultants. It's a recruiting and staffing services firm specializing in accounting and finance that has been serving the Denver and Boulder, Colorado markets since 2000. So Julie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ashby. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And then Lorrie Morton is the Director of People at Cohere Health, which she has over 20 years of experience in HR, including as the VP of People at Yaymaker and Director of Human Resources at TripAdvisor. Lorrie, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Especially since it is 5:30 your time, correct?
Yes.
So
5:35.
Yes. All right, so to start things off, I'd like to start with Brandon. So Brandon, it seems like the stimulus package, as intended, will drive some of the considerations that employers have as to whether or not to employ people and how that might come about. What can you tell us about the stimulus package that may influence those decisions?
Well, this is, it's an unprecedented time, certainly when it comes to stimulus. This is the largest that we've seen, relatively speaking, probably since the New Deal, in 1930s. But what we're looking at is the U.S. Treasury, the government, is using the tax system to flood liquidity into individuals' hands and to businesses' hands. And so a lot of HR organizations know, and they're very familiar with incentives, business incentives that have been around for 30 years, such as the work opportunity tax credit and other types of tax credits. But the ERTC, the new employee retention tax credit, is really unprecedented when it comes to this. And There's a lot of different kind of tax aspects of the stimulus package, but we're going to focus really on the employment-based tax credits. And what we've seen with all of our HR clients is that there are some difficult decisions being made and with people with respect to what are you going to do in situations where people are not working? What are you going to do in situations where people have reduced needs for their times? We have closed operations, and I think we've seen really amazing behavior for any company, most companies that we've seen that are able to keep supporting their employees through this crisis, and we've seen companies really come out of their pockets to make people whole as much as they possibly can. Well, the employee retention tax credit, which is 40 times the size of the work opportunity tax credit as far as annual budget, and safe to say the biggest employment incentive ever created, is providing a subsidy to that decision making for HR leaders. And so, and HR leaders now are really interfacing a lot with the CFOs of companies and CEOs in order to make all of these decisions. Well, the ERTC provides a 50% tax credit to 50% of the wages and healthcare costs up to the first $10,000 for each employee. And if you're over 100 employees, which then that means that you have to meet a few tests, and if you're under 100 employees, it's a little bit more. There are fewer restrictions on it, but let's focus on over 100 employees. In order to qualify, your business has to have been impacted in one of two ways. One is that you have had some type of suspension of your business, partial or complete, which is basically almost every company in the United States, by the COVID-19 governmental restrictions. So that would include travel restrictions, group meeting restrictions, shelter-in-place restrictions, any type of government order that we're seeing all over the country. And that test is done on a quarterly basis. So you look at each quarter, and you're then qualified the business for the entire quarter. The second test is, and it's either or. The second test is that your revenue has decreased by more than 50% versus the prior year's quarter. Now, most businesses will qualify under the first, and if you do, then any wages that you're paying to employees that are not working, then you'll get the 50%. You'll get the 50% credit, and that's a payroll tax credit that you'll get at 50% of those costs. Now, you have to measure it specifically for the time that they are not working, and that has become a significant issue. There's a lot of talk about this. There's a lot of written material on this. Some of it is conflicting from between the U.S. Department of Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service, and Senate and House committees. And when you actually read the law itself, there are some questions as far as how that applies. The simplest application of that is that many companies have paid employees just some type of specific payment in their payroll systems for staying home, for not working. That is kind of the most obvious part of this. And so companies can safely get the 50% of that, as well as many furloughed employees that companies have. If they're continuing to pay healthcare, for example, benefits, they'd be able to include that in the credit. So that would be kind of the simplest aspect. What we're looking at now, though, is what is the application in other common scenarios that all of us would think of. For example, if somebody has a gap in employment going from the office to a home work environment, yet the company continued to pay their wages either hourly or salary during that period. What if employees are going down from a full schedule to a reduced schedule, for example, and the company continues to pay them for the full schedule? What about employees, and many of us who we have children at home, their school's been canceled, for example, and we're spending 30 or 40% or more of our time, we're still getting the same compensation. We're just spending that amount of our time, helping our children rather than working, for example. So these are scenarios that are currently being worked out. I think they will be worked out favorably. There's some conflicting information between the IRS and Treasury and the legislative intent with the Senate Finance Committee, for example. But we're understanding that that's going to be clarified, and we do believe that there will be a very reasonable approach by the government as far as how you allocate the time that's being paid for by companies where employees are not working. But that's kind of the basic aspect of the credit. I would encourage everybody to look at that, as right now what we're seeing is most large organizations trying to make decisions. The first couple weeks, that was pretty easy for a lot of companies. Now we're in week 3, week 4, that we're looking at what are the decisions that are going to be made. Are we going to furlough? Are we going to lay off employees, for example? Those are tough decisions. Or are we going to continue to pay people who are not able to really provide the services that we need them to sustain the business? And so using this information in order to make good decisions is exactly what the stimulus package is about, is trying to encourage that continuity. And so that's a bit about it. The one other thing that I would mention is if you're under 100 employees, for companies that are under 100 employees, you actually can take the credit on employees that are still working. As long as your business met the test of being impacted in those quarters, even if the employees are working, you still get the credit. The only caveat is you can't get the payroll protection plan loans, forgivable loans, if you claim the credit, which is only really eligible for companies under 500 employees. But certainly, if you're under 100 employees, then it's relevant and a very present issue for employers. So measuring the difference between those two is going to be important. So that's a little bit of an overview. I can talk about any questions that you have, obviously, with respect to this, but that's the general overview of the program.
Brandon, thank you for bringing up the interaction between the credit and the loan. I would like to clarify, because there is some confusion among people I've been speaking with as well as on the web. Some people are assuming that this applies to all loans that are currently available through the stimulus package and even outside of it, the SBA. So in other words, the emergency relief loan. They feel that if they take this credit, or their understanding is if they take this credit, that they cannot apply for that loan. That is incorrect, if I understand correctly, right?
Yeah, that's correct, that it's incorrect. So you can take the 7A loan, which is the payroll protection program loan, and then that excludes you. That's mutually exclusive. You may not, it's either the tax credit or the forgivable loan. The non-forgivable loans, and I believe including the emergency $10,000 loan, those are not mutually exclusive with the tax credit. You are allowed to take those emergency loans that you have to pay back, the SBA loans, the disaster relief loans, and I believe the emergency $10,000 loan, I believe you're able to take those and still take the tax credit. It's specifically the 7A payroll protection program loan that you may not take. You can't double dip between that and the tax credit.
Okay. So, Lorrie, how has this been impacting your company? How has your company been responding to this?
So our company is doing fine. We're growing. We're all able to work remotely. We don't have any customers yet because we're building a product and we're on venture capital and other investments. So we are continuing to build the product, and our product is for healthcare. So we see that when we're ready to launch our product in 2021, that there will be actually pent-up demand, because our product is focused on a lot of the elective surgeries and elective processes that go on in healthcare, as opposed to emergency. And those are all been put on hold. and all hands on deck are for emergencies and for fighting this COVID-19. So, but that hasn't stopped us. It's hurt us a little bit in that we've been using doctors and nurses to help inform us of our decision, using them in focus groups and as advisors along the path that we're creating with this technology. And some of them have said that they can't do this right now because they are focused on COVID-19. So it's impacted us in that way, but it has not impacted us from a revenue perspective because we don't have a revenue right now.
And what are you hearing from other companies? This is both to you and to Julie, because I understand you're still in contact with your other companies as well.
Yeah, I actually had lunch with 3 HR people, virtual lunch with 3 HR people yesterday, and I asked each at a different company, and I asked them, you know, what's going on at their company, and it was a variety of things. One was high tech, and they said we haven't laid anybody off, but we've stopped hiring. Another one was an event planning company, and they have definitely laid people off, and their senior leadership has stopped taking salaries, and their next step is to cut who's left by 20% through July. And then the third company, they've seen a hit of like 80% in their revenue, but they're considered an essential business, so they haven't laid anybody off, and if someone leaves or can't work, they have to replace them because they need someone to do the work. So it's a variety of situations.
Julie, how about you?
So we're seeing a combination of things within the walls of our firm. So J2T has 15 full-time employees, our executive recruiters along with our operational and support staff, and then we have 30 contractors and consultants in the field. We have only seen 4 of our consultants be released from assignments with clients. And, those clients are all doing the right thing. To Brandon's note, we're seeing, I would say, really substantial human behavior from our clients and from the people that we're privileged to work with every day. Not at 100%, but damn close. And so that's been uplifting, and it's been neat to see how people are working diligently to take every approach possible before having to lay off or furlough. And we're seeing that in a combination of, pay cuts, whether it's tiered, higher at the top and then lower as you go, or a straight percentage across the top. Because Colorado grows and incubates companies, Colorado is a growth market. The assistance programs that are coming out are all the talk of all of my clients right now, because the majority of Colorado companies will meet that threshold on under 500 employees, and many will meet that threshold on under 100. So I would say that all focus right now is on the health and welfare of their teams, their people, their families, but a ton of attention is being given to these programs and how they can potentially benefit the small to mid-sized businesses in Colorado, which is the majority of our businesses and the majority of where people go to work in Colorado.
So have you heard from a business that has changed the decision it made in terms of employment and how it's engaging its employees as a result of the stimulus package?
When you said changed, can you give me an example of what you're referencing?
So, for example, hire people back. Has it enabled them to restore regular hours for people?
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet is the answer to that question, because the ability to apply for most of those things, specifically the PPP, right, does not go live until today. And my understanding is that is still a little bit tenuous. So the application process coupled with the actual funding, that is going to be determined in the coming days and weeks. And so I do believe that all the companies that are applying for the PPP are going to honor it exactly as it's written, which is to save jobs, right? It is for the purposes of payroll and ensuring that people can go to work. So I would expect that that would service the employees in the intention that it was mannered, for what it was intended. You know, for our clients in particular, we run a client roster of about 120 companies a year. That tends to be where we kind of float on our client roster. I would say at this point, somewhere between 15 and 20% of them are experiencing either across the top or tiered down salary reductions. We are hearing of layoffs, certainly, some larger than others. And I think there are more to come, but I'm hoping that with the stimulus package, that will return and recover the majority of those jobs. Not all, but a healthy chunk. And that, again, that's to be determined.
Okay. Lorrie, how about you? How do you think that, are there other ways that you think that the stimulus package might impact some of these decisions?
Well, since I don't have firsthand knowledge because my company's not in that right now, but we have been talking to our auditors about if people get sick, and the Families First law that went into effect this week, where you have to pay people, this is for small employers, less than 500, where you have to pay people for the first 80 hours that they're out sick, if they're out sick because of the virus, and they're out sick, or they're out sick because of taking care of someone who has the virus, without taking it out of their earned paid time off. So it's like an additional 80 hours, so you can continue paying them even though they're not working. And then the second part of that law is when you're less than 50 employees, you don't qualify for FMLA, which is the Federal Medical Leave Act, where you get job protection for 12 weeks. And employers smaller than that can just replace you. They don't have to abide by that. And this law, this Emergency Family Medical Leave Act law, makes it so that small employers do have to keep people's jobs for them for up to 12 weeks if they're impacted by the virus. And this also means if they lose their childcare and have to take care of their children, and they can't work, they can't telework, they just have to focus on their children or on the illness. And then there are tax credits for that come out of that when you pay them or you save their job for them. But we haven't had to have that happen yet, and hopefully it will never happen from our company. But so I'm not exactly sure how that works, those tax credits, but somebody else on this call probably could tell me.
Okay, Brandon, is that something that you think we might be able to address quickly?
Well, if you're referring to the tax credits for the sick pay leave under the Families First Act a few weeks ago.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that we haven't found that to be a very common situation. What I was concerned about when we first saw it, and again, it's only for companies under 500 employees, and that's really based on a control group analysis, meaning we've seen some companies that have clients that have 60,000 employees and say, well, we have this subsidiary that has less than 500 and they think they have to pay this and pay this leave. And I said, well, you should be really careful, because if you pay the leave, you're not going to get a tax credit, because it's based on the entire group of companies of whether you are entitled to the credit and whether you're required to pay that leave. Now, yes, there is a tax credit, there is an obligation, and then the government is coming to basically pay you for the paid leave that you're paying, and that's specifically for people that either have the virus, they're taking care of somebody who has the virus, or, and this was kind of the big loophole that, or the big risk that we saw, was that if you had, and this was before all the school district closures started happening, when they released this, is if you have, your children at home based on a school closure. And so we thought that was going to be a pretty big deal. It turns out that it doesn't look like it's being abused much, but the issue is that you'd have to pay somebody paid leave, then you would get a tax credit back. The original draft of the bill, which was corrected recently, was that you would have to pay their entire compensation, then you'd get a very small amount of tax credit back. They fixed that to kind of match the two up. So of a couple $200, I believe. So that's that program. We haven't seen it to be, it is really looking, and hopefully companies are going to do that anyway. We have certainly, even encouraged everybody to reach out to us if there are any kind of issues going on with specific people having those type of needs, specific people having family members or themselves who would be sick, that we have made accommodations and really tried to help them. This is kind of just trying to make sure that anybody who doesn't want to do that they do it, and then the government's going to help pay for that. So if you're under 500 employees, but that's that program. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the FMLA. I did see that they kind of made it more restrictive for companies where they had exempted them before, like you're saying. I'm not as familiar with that part.
Thank you, Brandon.
Pleasure.
Julie, you had recently mentioned some of the conversations you've been having with executives in terms of making that decision whether or not to keep people on, and you had pretty interesting insights in regards to that, and things that you've raised to executives that they might not, all of them might not have been considering in regards to retaining people and some of the changes that you can make. Can you share with us some of the conversations that you've been having, some of the things that you've been encouraging executives to consider?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We've had a range of those conversations the last couple of weeks, and almost on an hourly basis at this point. Most of them with positive outcomes. I think because we are in a time where everyone is learning minute to minute, the rules are changing daily, the data is changing daily. We had a number of clients, understandably, operate very much from a place of panic and a place of fear a few weeks ago. And so they rushed hastily into a decision to release contractors and employees. And so when we were getting calls specifically as it related to our contractors that, we've got to end their assignment, today's their last day, we love them, they're awesome. They've been so great. And as soon as things move in the right direction, they'll be our first phone call. We want to have them back, but we need to end their assignment today. The conversation we've been having is really more of before we do that, is there an opportunity to keep them? What's it going to take? What's it going to take? We're of course, deeply discounting our own rates because right now we're not interested in making money. We're interested in keeping people in jobs. So because that's the key to this recovery. The key to this recovery is keeping America working. And so saying to our clients, what's it going to take? And they'll say, gosh, even if you came down on bill rate, we just wouldn't even be able to do it. Okay, what if the candidate comes down on their pay rate? What if we hit it from both angles, right? We come way off our bill rate, they come down on pay rate, we get the rate so substantially down you can't say no. They're like, even with that, I don't think I'd get it approved. All right, well, you're billing them out at 44 hours a week. What if we reduce their hours from 44 to 32? I mean, we're literally having a conversation with our executives of what's it going to take? What's it going to take so that this person can return to work tomorrow? And the majority of them are coming back with a solution. And it's painful. It's painful for everyone. No one wants to take a pay cut. No one wants to watch half of their hours vaporize, or their benefits if they reduce their hours. But here's what I know with certainty. Every single one of our candidates, once we removed our fee and they were asked to take a pay cut, they all opted to take a pay cut and keep working in a modified capacity versus not work at all, because we're all in it together. Everyone is going to have to give way more than they take. Everyone. And what we're seeing is that mostly people are. There was one client where I didn't agree with the approach to lay off hundreds and hundreds of people. But executive comp, the only thing that was hit on executive comp was that they weren't going to do distributions. I have a huge issue with that fundamentally. That's not okay. I think that's not okay. I also think that some of that was made in haste and some of that was made in fear. And in a market where leaders are being forced to make quick decisions, this will not be a situation where we get to have all of the information, where we get to really, work the problem in order to have a perfect solution. people are moving so fast to do what they need to do. So everyone's going to have to show everyone a lot of grace and a lot of liberty, because I think people are truly trying to do the right thing. And only history will tell where people come out on the right side of this or the wrong side of this. The other thing that we're doing, we saw this happen last week. I thought this was incredibly creative on one of the parts of our recruiters, is we had a lot of people in final contention, literally in final interview or in offer process. Some of them either with accepted offers and had already resigned from their positions, but hadn't onboarded yet. And so navigating that has been really interesting. The bulk of our clients, that's not even true. It wasn't the bulk. Probably 40% of our searches went on hold. And some of them are still absolutely engaged, active. It's a critical must-have. It's a critical need, and they're going to make a hire for that position. And that's great. I'm happy to see that. We had one client that had already put forth an offer, and the offer was accepted. And it was a $140,000 offer, and the candidate was to start in a week. And they said, we can't do it. This is our candidate. We know certainty this is our candidate, and we will bring this person on board when we're functioning, when we're back in the office. But we don't actually think we can onboard this person, and certainly not to the tune of 140 if they're going to home office. We don't really know how to make that work. And after a lot of back and forth conversation, what the solution ended up being, and this was all driven almost exclusively by the candidate and the recruiter, was that what they came up with was that he would come on virtually for 100,000 instead of 140 until everybody was able to go back to work in a state of normalcy, and did a 30-day performance guarantee, right? Like he pretty much said, if in 30 days you're not happy with my performance, if you're not happy with my performance in a week, let me go. But you're going to be thrilled, and you're going to want to keep me, and you're not going to be able to get me on full time fast enough. And they agreed to it. And he started work, I think, Monday. And so I thought that was a really creative solution so that he could go to work. The client's pushing back in resistance, which was an understandable one. He's got kids at home, right? They're trying to get their kids online and working. I mean, we're not even going to be able to get full production out of this guy, not to mention that we can't really, it's going to be hard to train remotely. I thought that was such a creative, brilliant, smart move, and everybody gave quite a bit, and everybody, I think, is going to win quite a bit. So it's going to take a lot of those types of creative modeling that we've never done before, never seen before. But that has to start with leadership, right? I think people, even if you're in a position as an executive in the market, you're going to have to lead on those solutions.
And that's a really good point. Another thing that's coming up is how companies are selecting which employees to retain versus those that aren't. And it's fascinating to see that they're focusing on certain groups, such as marketing, that might actually be critical to this period, because marketing, if you're going to spend money somewhere, the message that you're communicating during this time period can actually be pretty crucial towards the survival of a company. And there seems to be other areas too where they seem to have gone away from the focus of areas where that can bring in cash to essentially to other areas. Where I'm going with this is both to you and Lorrie and Brandon as well. Are there areas where it might make sense to continue to employ people in this situation? I would imagine, for example, perhaps on the accounting side or finance side, in terms of helping to find opportunities for cash. Same thing with tax, because with the new law, there's a lot of retroactive changes that companies can take advantage of to bring in cash right away if they're in a situation in prior tax periods to do so. Are there some other areas, just very high level, where you've seen where there might be some opportunities?
Well, this is Brandon. I think that the playbook here, how you kind of look at these situations, it really depends on a lot of different circumstances. This is a much different situation than what we've seen in the past, like in 2008, where everyone is expecting a prolonged economic downturn, complete change in the economic cycle. I think people are more worried now that it's not going to come back to normal, but the government and business is doing everything they can to try to make sure that there's a bridge when it comes to this gap, that there's a liquidity bridge. The biggest mistakes that were made in 2008 and 2009 is where there were winners and losers as far as bailouts, and some companies got bailed out and some companies didn't, and it was really damaging. And we've learned from that. The government has certainly learned from that. And so I think it's every company's responsibility, especially when there's all this money coming in from the government to help businesses, especially with these PPP loans, for example, for smaller companies. It's everyone's responsibility and it's their business to make sure that you're not harming yourself from the long term. The areas, though, that you're going to look at, assuming you're not a business that is completely, gutted, like hotels or restaurants, for example, right now, entertainment venues, things like that, amusement parks. But assuming that you're just trying to tighten your belt and look at contingencies going on, then you're looking at areas.
Brenda, I think we might have lost you. Okay, we'll come back to that. So
I was agreeing with what he was saying. Just is that you really have to look at your business and say, what is our cash position right now? Can we pay people? Who are the right people to pay? What do we need to keep our business going? I think it's going to take it takes a lot of intense scrutiny. It's not like a normal, not that there's a normal layoff, but when people are reorging, so they lay people off, or they have a downturn in revenue, so they lay people off, or they acquire a company and have redundancy and then lay off the duplicate roles. It's a really different thing that people really have to look at from all different angles to try to predict what is going to be the best path for us to move forward so that we're still here in 3 months or 6 months.
So it sounds like then, from what you're saying, it would be, in making that decision, it would also be good for companies to incorporate other teams into that information gathering aspect, at least, of that process, that determination. So in other words, to find out from other teams where there might be opportunities to bring in more cash, or resolve some of the issues that might be coming up for the company in this situation.
Yeah, I don't know how the cash part would be probably finance and then sales and wherever the revenue is coming from and figuring that out. But I think it would be more about where can we cut costs that maybe doesn't cut people, things of that nature. But also, and also looking at it from try to take the personalities out of it and just say, what are the roles that we will need to move forward and who's best suited to do that role, and go from there and try to take the person out of it for a minute and just look at it from that perspective. And then you got to overlay it with what's the right thing to do.
Okay, great, thank you. Brandon, it looks like Brandon's back. Brandon, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I was just getting to my point. Sorry about that, everyone. I think the main thing when it comes to generating cash and making sure to protect, the companies protecting themselves for the long term is, you really need to focus on execution. So prioritization and execution, on everything that you're doing, and as a process, certainly that you're doing contingency planning. And when it comes to generating, business and revenue, I think everybody in the organization has to focus. You have to kind of look for opportunities where you have cost savings, but also as far as revenue opportunities, you're going to have to adapt and shift very quickly. We've seen a lot of companies, for example, that are repurposing manufacturing to things that can help the emergency situation with COVID-19. We've seen clients that are also just trying to support different industries than they're usually supporting. And I think that you have to plan for this to be around for at least another 3 to 5 months, I would say, when you're looking at your contingency planning. As well, when it comes to reducing costs, really, I don't think any business is looking to cut people that are really important for them for the long term, and would be very difficult to rehire, and they don't want to certainly lose those people. I think also, to the extent companies can really handle it, it is a tremendous damage to their brand at the time of need, their employer brand at the time of need, if companies aren't standing by them to the extent that they have the financial resources to do so. From a long-term perspective, you really have to keep your eye on the ball, make adjustments that can represent opportunities right now, and be disciplined in your execution. Certainly, one of those aspects is the government program. So, not wasting time, not being extremely decisive, and not necessarily accepting no for an answer. We're seeing a lot of banks that are wishy-washy, for example, and not really having their act together. So I think
I think we might have lost Brandon again. All right, so we'll come back to that. Lorrie and Julie, what are some recommendations that you would make for employers who are transitioning to having remote employees? So, for example, a lot of stories are coming out, accidents, for example. There might be a meeting going on and the naked spouse walks around by in the background. Or somebody's walking around on on computer, again on another meeting, and trips and falls. What are some recommendations that you would make? And Lorrie, in particular, another concern too is, actually we'll come back to that. I want to give you both the chance to respond. So Julie, it looks like you might have something to say in this regard.
Well, so this is an really interesting topic for us because, or for me particularly, J2T has been virtual for 20 years. So this is a model that we love, embrace, and it's biblical for us. I do think what's happening in our world is going to forever shape how we work. I think 10 years from now, we're going to work very, very, very differently. What I would say to the home office thing, a couple things that I think just need to be solid common sense. And I realize we all have different space and different environments in which we work. But regardless if you are in 500 square feet or 5,000 square feet, a couple things have to happen. One, you have to have routine. You have to have routine because routine will set you free. And in a situation that we're in right now where everyone feels so out of control, you can control your own routine. How you work, the hours that you work, where you work. If you are now co-working with a spouse and children, you will need to have a place and a space where you work that you can protect with some boundaries, which means a conversation with your spouse and about, with your kids about when you need to be on the phone, ideally behind a closed door, but that's not an option right now, given that we have a lot of families co-working and co-schooling together. So that for many is the kitchen table and the breakfast bar or the basement or whatever it is. But, sit down, get focused, protect your space, get on your call and have that conversation with your now coworkers, right? Your family of coworkers. I think you just have to have an adult conversation and everybody's got to get on the same page about what has to happen. But I think a routine with whether you're an employee or an employer, Starting every day with your team with some sort of daily huddle or daily stand-up, I think that's mission critical. You can easily do it by Zoom. That's how we do it. We start our day with that every day. It's 15 minutes. There's a hard stop at 15. I've seen everything from starting your day with just popcorn style on good news to what's your top priority of the day or how you're going to move the business forward. But I think right now, connecting your people, communicate. But rhythm and routine are mission critical. The technology pieces of home office, if anybody wants to reach out to me directly for our playbook on Home Office 101, to include everything from all the technology tools to our rhythm communications, to our KPI whiteboard that we use virtually, to the protocol that we use for people who home office and what that needs to look like in terms of an adult agreement and how they protect their space. I'm more than happy to share those tools.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Lorrie, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything Julie just said. That's very, very important. I chuckle with the spouse walking behind because occasionally not naked, but my husband does occasionally show up. but he's been very respectful. We have had that conversation. He knows that unfortunately I have a wonderful, beautiful office up on the 3rd floor, but the Wi-Fi is very spotty, so I have to come downstairs to the 1st floor where I am now. And you find that out at the wrong time sometimes if you don't test that out and make sure you have the right accommodations. And I think other issues that come in, I love the routine suggestion, is knowing when to stop working, because when you work at home, it all can blend together, and Saturday can look like Monday because you're still doing work and you're there and you got all your tools. So it's easy to sit down and start getting back into work, and you forget to take time off, and you may think you're being more productive, but in the long run, you'll be less productive and you'll start to get burned out. And I'm really concerned about people burning out from working from home, who it's a new thing to do and they haven't set up. They've only been doing it for 3 weeks, and so it's still novel to them and they're still trying to figure that out.
Really quick on the Wi-Fi issue, this is an interesting one. I keep hearing all kinds of data trends on this. So because everyone has now moved into their home office, especially for people who never have before, they may have wireless capabilities that are perfectly acceptable and fast enough for just, living at home and Netflix or your Sonos or whatever that is. But many people are just on a basic package, right? If you are now working at home, your spouse is working at home, and your kids are now homeschooling or working virtually, you immediately need to call your provider and jump it up the next level, maybe 2, right? So for $20 a month or $40 a month, you're going to want that if we continue to work this way, which I believe will be the case for at least 4 to 8 more weeks. So spend the $20 so that you can stay connected on your meetings, so that you are able to keep your family connected while it's going on. You can also get those boosters. You can literally get on Amazon.com and pick yourself up a $40 booster that will boost your Wi-Fi. But the Wi-Fi pressure for residential is so overly taxed right now. And it's just, I thought it was a really piece of, I can't remember where the news feed was, where I thought, oh my gosh, that's something that people wouldn't think about, that they just need to call and jump it up a level, and it will greatly benefit, your connectivity and allow you and your family to do the things you need to do to keep your routine.
And to go along with that too, the Wi-Fi signal goes downward instead of upwards. So if you put it higher in your house versus in the basement, you'll need a booster most likely if it's in the basement. But if it's higher in your house, the signals will go downwards. So I'm going to shift to another subject. Lorrie, at this time, there is always the potential of risk of losing employees. And sometimes, we're talking about too, where companies are essentially having to lay off and terminate those relationships just out of financial need. Yet at the same time, this is all coming about very swiftly. And so there might be key employees that have crucial information, such as passwords to access online accounts, including bank accounts. Would you have recommendations as to what companies can do to transition this knowledge?
That's always a big issue. What we try to document everything. When it comes to passwords, you know, we have the IT administrator doesn't necessarily know the passwords, but with someone, say, just in normal times, someone gets terminated suddenly for some reason, and we don't have time to do what you're talking about. We do figure out that the IT people usually can figure that out, they can break it and they can get that. So that's less of a concern, the password stuff, but knowledge that are in people's brains and knowledge that they've accumulated over time is very important. So we try, at least at this startup, well, with this new company that we've started, we're trying to document as much of the processes and the information that we learn through our all of our tools that we use, so that we don't lose the knowledge. But it is a hard one to do, and having two people trained in the same thing is always, but small companies, that's hard for them to do, because you only have one person responsible for that one thing, because you're a small company and you can't afford to have two people doing the same job. So it's more about documenting and learning, but it becomes to light more now because the loss of more people at once all of a sudden. So it is a tough situation, and all you can do is try to document everything that you're doing so it can be transitioned. Okay.
All right. And what would you recommend for productivity? If there's concerns that an employer might have in regards to a person's productivity, or a manager might have in regards to a team member's productivity while they're working from home, would you have recommendations as to things that they can do to ensure productivity?
Well, it's a management issue no matter where the productivity is, whether it's at home or in the office. If you have a person who is not performing or producing what they should be, they're missing deadlines, or they're missing work opportunities. You have to have starts with a conversation, and you got to figure out what's going on. Why is that person not meeting their deadlines? Why is that person not being as productive as they should be? And then from there, try to troubleshoot to see if you can come up with some resolutions and some ideas to help that person be more productive, such as daily check-ins, like what Julie was talking about, daily stand-ups, and outlining what's got to happen that day, making sure that the deadlines are in place, and checking in with the person more frequently to say, what's going on? Where are you on this? What's the progress on that? But in the end, if the productivity is not there, and there's no sickness or reason for the person not being able to produce, then it may be a harder conversation, and it may be one where someone is put on a performance improvement plan.
Okay. So we have 6 minutes left. I'd like to close the conversation by addressing what companies should consider or plan for if this becomes long-term, and also where there might be strategic opportunities for companies in this situation. So Lorrie, we'll start with you.
So say the question again, for long-term?
Yeah, what would you recommend or advise companies that they should do or plan for if this becomes a long-term situation? So for example, if this ends up, we end up having rolling stay-at-home orders for the next 18 months, say, what they should plan to do, and then if there's any strategic opportunities that you see in this situation.
Well, there's sort of like the basic stuff, like maybe you need to start to train how to work remotely, and giving people all these tips, and making sure people have the Wi-Fi connections and the tools they need to work from home. And then also having a good policy into place, so it helps with the people who may be not working from home as well as we need them to be. They work better in the office for whatever reason, and because they have more freedom, they're not working as well. So making sure you have those policies to help managers manage those performance issues. And then from there, I think it's about, maybe is thinking about it. If you think this is going to be a rolling thing, maybe you don't need as much space in your main office. Maybe you can cut back on the space, and you don't need to have that much space because you're not there as much. Or, you make investments in other things like the IT tools and security that you may need depending on your company to keep people up and running. those are the things that jump to mind for me. It's new territory, so having to think and brainstorm with other people, like how does this impact them? Having a different kind of disaster plan in place. We have disaster plans for fires and for floods and for earthquakes and tornadoes. You know, what is a disaster plan for a pandemic? And maybe putting that and thinking that through.
Great, thank you. And Julie, I'd like to ask the same question for you. Also, if you could add to that too, if there's anything people can do now who are we're actually unemployed for personal reasons, if there's something that they can do for themselves to make them employment ready.
That last part cut out. I understand the first part on, but you said, can you restate, how do people help what?
Oh, so for somebody who's unemployed now, what advice would you give them as to what they can do to make themselves, employment ready?
Okay, thank you. I just needed a restatement on that. Okay, let's cover the home office first. And her question was, what if this continues? What if this goes 60 days? What if this goes 6 months? What if this goes 16 months? No one has a crystal ball, but here's what has to happen. Stop waiting and start working. That's what has to happen. It has to happen now. So I think we have been waiting for the powers that be to tell us it's okay to start living normally. It's okay to start working again. You should stop waiting for that. I'm an exceedingly optimistic, sometimes to a fault person. So I am optimistic that we're going to be working somewhat normally within 30 to 60 days. And I think it will come in waves, but stop waiting. Stop waiting and figure out what the new normal looks like for you, and go back to the routine of your old normal and figure out how to insert that into the new rules and into the new way of working. But the flow of your day, when you got up, when you went to bed, when you worked out, what time you ate, what time you huddled as a team, what time you had your management meetings, whatever those things are, you better find some routine. You better find it fast, because we got to keep people working and we got to get people back to work. And the only way that happens is if you stop waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to go back to work. Because what we will figure out as a country, and it's already happening, because there's no one in this world that has more ingenuity, determination, or grit than Americans. Figure it out. You got to figure it out, and you got to get to work. Because we've been home officing for 20 years, up until 3 weeks ago, we had always had a child-free workplace policy. So when you are at work in your home office, it needs to be a child-free workplace. With everybody at home right now, right, we have to be flexible and nimble on that with all of our families, and we are. But what we ask of our staff, and what you should be asking of your staff and your coworkers, is when you're here, and what I mean by that is that when you're at work, be here. When you're here, be here. And when you're not and you need to tend to your family, that's where you should be, right? But I think it's really detrimental when people try to make the shift to home office and they try to multitask. That is a recipe for no. So when you're at work, be at work. And when you're with your family, be with your family, be present. That's one of the gifts that we're seeing out of this nightmare, is that people are spending real time presently with their families. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But now you're going to have to start doing it in terms of how we work differently. As it relates to people who are finding themselves unexpectedly out of work, or were transitioning opportunity before, please take this recommendation with a grain of salt, because I recognize that many people may not be able to take this counsel, and I respect that. And so a couple different strategies. The first one is, if you are able emotionally, if you are able financially, to hit the pause button on your search for 30 days, I would highly encourage that. Not things that are hot or active or low-hanging fruit that's totally in your lane and it screams you and you know that that is 100% who you are and you would probably outperform other candidates in interviews. Continue to go after those things. But right now, all of my clients, without exception, really cannot think beyond the now. Everyone is in triage mode, trying to figure out how to take care of their present staff, how to retain their staff, working everything they can do not to lay off. So to think about any sort of strategic hire, new hire, growth hire, even a real need. And they're still out there, by the way. We picked up 4 searches in the last 3 days. There's business out there. Even though the market is grinding, it has not grinded to a halt. But it is going to be very prickly for at least 30 days while the leaders in our community and the leaders of our businesses try to navigate this. I would show them a lot of grace, and I would show them a little bit of breathing room. Allow them to come up for air so that they then have the capacity to think more in a forward fashion, to include hiring for critical needs, hiring for must-haves. But you know, we were pulsing so hard as a business community and as a country. We already saw the poll results go out, I think, on the 21% layoffs, which means that 80% of the businesses out there are working. And most companies prior to this were hiring because we were in such a surge of growth. That hasn't come to a total and complete stop. So if you're not able to take 30 days off, get really clear on who you are, what you do, and stay in your lane. It's not a great time to be a purple squirrel or cast too broad of a net or over or under apply for opportunity. And I'm going to speak in accounting terms because that's what my speak is. But if you are a CFO applying for accounting manager or controller manager jobs just to cover your bases is probably not the right strategy at this point. If you are a senior staff accountant swinging for the bleachers on your first assistant controller or controller role, not well timed. You know, be aware of what's happening in the market. Don't be tone deaf, right? Stay in your lane, have conversation that is meaningful and purposeful and makes lives better for you and for others. But when people apply for positions that are so out of their wheelhouse, it really muddies the water. So you got to think about it. We came out of a period where a job posting would go up and they might get 6 applicants. Now a job posting is going to go up and they're going to get 600. And now the person that is hiring for that role probably had a researcher or a support person to do that for them and to go through the stack. They may not have that now, and they may have to do that themselves. And when 570 of those applicants were tone deaf, which prohibits the 30 that could really be qualified for that opportunity and get to work quickly, it just delays the process for that person to get to work quickly.
Julie, I want to thank you for that. I actually kept this going 5 minutes longer because we were getting very good feedback from our audience. In fact, I think we still have the full audience on. But we do need to bring this to a close. We did have one question that came up. It was in regards to paid sick leave. So for the person that asked that question, what the question was what about where it's under 50 employees and a person has not been tested but has underlying health issues and has been told to stay home by their doctor. We'll respond to that question offline and post that on our website. Are there any final thoughts that either of you would like to share with everyone before we bring this to a close? We have to keep this to maybe about 30 seconds.
I'll keep mine quick. I wish you all the greatest. I wish you all blessings, health, joy. I'm available to you. Ashby has my permission to share my cell phone and my email because I'm not going anywhere. I'm home. If I can help you in any way on your strategy, on how to retain your people, on how to get lean and stay lean so that you can not only survive but thrive, I'm here and available to each and every one of you. We will get through this together.
Thank you. Lorrie, how about you?
Oh, it'd be hard to top that, but but I just wish people all the best, and I hope that this will not be going on for months and months, that we will come out of this. And I do think there'll there'll definitely be lingering changes to how we work, and teleworking will be much more prevalent than it is now. A lot of the resistors will have realized you can work this way. And then there'll be others who realize how important it is to be in the office, and how much those who complained about their commute and complained about sharing an office may actually now appreciate it. But there'll be all kinds of other things. Different businesses will figure out that they don't need to do what they thought they had to do in one area, and that there's an opportunity in another area. And so all I can say is just to hang in there and to keep trying to find the right place for you, and to have patience, and to have grit. Grits, I've heard I heard from several sources, is one of those things that really determines whether people are successful or not. So be strong and have grit.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate your participation in this, and want to thank also all of our participants or attendees for attending this event. If anybody has any further questions, they can send them to info@taxforward.org, and we'll be sending out more information about how to access this video online next week. Thank you again. Have a good weekend.
Ashley, thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Lori. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, bye. Yeah, bye-bye.
Be well.